I think the answer to the question is that yes, the left in government does have a duty to promote democracy worldwide, but that should not be the only part of the conversation that we have with governments around the world. It's a much broader conversation is needed to support developing country governments, which is what I'm going to touch on. I think you also need to think about what we mean by democracy, because it can mean very different things to very different people. We've heard from Sammy and from Claire the whole debate, or one side of the debate, around the military interventions that have taken place in the name of democracy. I think there are a whole series of other ways in which you can support democracy to develop. And I do believe that democracy is in the interests of the world's poorest people, and that's why we should support it. I think it's a fundamental part of the good governance that is required in country, delivered in the way in which people in that country want. But without it, progress in terms of economic and social development doesn't take place at the speed or with the freedoms that we take for granted here. So of course you can talk about Kosovo, you can talk about Iraq, but you can also talk about what my department and other departments are doing to promote the development of free media around the world. You can talk about the support to help parliaments hold their leaders to account. I don't think it's anti-democratic to be supporting poor people and their governments to challenge corruption in their country, because where corruption takes place, inevitably and usually the money ends up in the hands of elites and actually reinforces anti-democratic forces and slows down the path of democracy. So having safeguards on how you give aid, that there must be efforts to prevent corruption in place, that governments must be committed to reducing poverty before we hand significant sums of money over, I think is perfectly sensible. Perhaps we should take some other examples from around the world to explore this question. Iraq is one particular question, but let's explore the question of democracy in Afghanistan. Without the political developments that there have been, without the intervention in Afghanistan that there has been, not only would there not be democracy, but there wouldn't be the development, economic development that is slowly taking place in Afghanistan as that democracy underpins some progress. We wouldn't be seeing women back teaching, we wouldn't be seeing girls in school, we wouldn't be seeing women having a role in the political life of their country if there, A, wasn't democracy, and B, if there hadn't been the intervention in the first place to support that progress. Sri Lanka. There is, in theory, democracy in Sri Lanka. There is elections do take place on a regular basis. But that, I think, doesn't negate the duty of the left in government to challenge the government of Sri Lanka and the other different political players in Sri Lanka on the question of human rights. It doesn't, I think, negate our responsibility to try and bring the Sinhalese community, the Muslim community and the Tamil community together to address some of the reasons why the ethnic tensions in that country are as great and are as profound as they are, and why they've and which have driven the conflict in that country in the way that it has. I think it is acceptable for the left to support democracy, if by supporting democracy we're also meaning that we're supporting the development of the rule of law, because you cannot have freedom and you're not going to have real economic and social progress if the very poorest people in a country don't feel some sense of security. So the left, I think, should also be in government asking the question about what is the situation around security, how do we help you develop an effective police force, an effective army that is run by the civilians democratically elected, because without those preconditions you're not going to see economic and social progress that we would recognise or that we would want to see. So I think the question is yes, we should be supporting democracy, but we've got to have a much broader conversation with the governments with whom we engage with. We've got to have a conversation with them about how we support the development of security in country, how we support the development of the economy in that country. And yes, I think it is reasonable on occasion to say, we're going to support you, we're going to give you money to do that, but in return, we think you should be doing a number of things. We think you should be committed to the elimination of poverty in your country and have a strategy by which you're going to do that. We shouldn't impose our ideas as to how they should go about producing the strategy, but I think it is reasonable that we should ask for there to be a clear strategy for the government to go about reducing poverty in its own way. And yes, I think it's reasonable too, when we hand money over, to be expecting the government to be continuing to put in place the mechanisms it needs to do to reduce corruption in country. That's in the interest of the very poorest people in that country as well. And nor, thirdly, the other safeguard that we impose before we give our aid do I think it's unreasonable for us to say there's got to be progress in terms of human rights in your country, and if there isn't progress in human rights in terms of when we give aid, then we're going to have a conversation with you about it, and on occasion we're going to hold money back where we have concerns about the progress of human rights. So yes, but it's a much broader conversation we've got to have.
What you talked about, Gareth, is about government-to-government connections. And I think some of the speakers here have said that what we need to do is examine what has been the outcome of some of those, over a period of time. What has been the outcome of those government-to-government interventions? And frankly, the others are arguing that they haven't been very positive. Interesting that Sammy talked about the engagement with the democratic forces who are non-governmental. I mean, is that part of the department's thinking as well?
Well, I do think you've got to engage with all the players in a country that, in a sense, to truly understand what you're trying to achieve in country. So on occasion, you do have to have a conversation with undemocratic forces. I think that's true. But I think
undemocratic forces or democratic?
Undemocratic forces. Sometimes you do have to have a conversation with. You may not want them to be in the positions of power that they're in. You may want democracy in place, but you've got to deal with the world in which you live in, not the world in which you would like to see. Is the truth. And I think you can see a whole series of interventions, some military interventions, but also interventions in terms of aid, where as a result of those interventions, we have seen substantial progress. We've seen substantial progress as a result of our interventions in terms of the money we've given in Mozambique, in Ghana, in India, in Sri Lanka, etc. And Afghanistan, I think, is the argument, both for military intervention in support of democracy and in terms of what our aid is producing. Nobody could possibly say that Afghanistan is in a perfect situation, but I do believe it is in a fundamentally better situation than it was 6 years ago when the Taliban were running the country. We've got a long way to go. The democracy is very fragile, but we need to continue to support it.
So a question? Yes, okay.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Gareth what he thinks the top priority is for British foreign policy. Is it the national interest, or is it democracy promotion and development?
Well, I think in the end it has to be the national interest first. And that's an odd thing to say, in that my department is governed by a piece of legislation that says the only thing that can justify the spending of money by my department is to reduce poverty around the world. So we can't use it to promote the UK's interests. We have to use it to promote poverty first. So I think that is the national interest must come first. But I think it is in our interests nationally too to see a reduction in poverty. And Afghanistan is perhaps the example of that. 90% of the heroin that ends up on Britain's streets comes from farmers in Afghanistan who are growing opium poppy, who don't have any alternative livelihood to pursue, which brings in the same amount of money. So it's in the interests of the poorest people in Afghanistan that we support their development, that we help create jobs, etc. in Afghanistan. But it's also in our national interest, for all the reasons around terrorism and the opium crop as well.
Okay.